Hi everybody, Al Bernstein here with another Quick Hits video. And on this one we're going to talk about a potential fight, one that seems to be in the making and gives us a chance to discuss the future of a fighter who is certainly well known to boxing fans, and that is Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. There is much talk that he will face Badou Jack sometime in the coming months for Jack's 168-pound title. Now, Jack defending this title for the second time after beating George Groves, and when you think of him and Chavez Jr., the fight is an intriguing idea because we know two things. We know Chavez Jr. brings with notoriety, and whatever you want to say about him is always an interesting fight. However, there is this one little small issue, and that is that Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. can't seem to make 168 pounds anymore. Now, in his last fight against Reyes, he came to the weigh-in, and they had already made some kind of arrangement because everybody knew that Chavez Jr. was not going to make 168 pounds. So they pushed the weight up to 170 pounds to accommodate him. Now, you'll remember that in the fight previous to that, he had fought at 175 pounds when he got beaten by Andre Fonfara. So the premise of this fight is based on the fact that Chavez Jr. can make 168 pounds. Now, let's use that as a jumping off point to talk about Chavez Jr. and talk about where he's at and where he's been. Many boxing fans, and I can feel it on Twitter and when I see fans and all the ways I have to communicate with boxing fans, they're frustrated with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., as are most of us that cover him. You're trying to be neutral, of course, and you don't hopefully allow that to get involved in your coverage. But by the same token, he's a frustrating figure. And the reason he's frustrating is because he's his own worst enemy. He can't seem to ever make weight for fights. He changes trainers as often as Madonna used to change lovers, you know? And he is just an infuriating figure in many ways because he has boxing ability. He's offensively, when he's at his best and in shape, is a very good fighter and fun to watch. And in fact, as I mentioned, he's always in an interesting fight. That really, you look at all his fights, and at the end of the day, they're all interesting. Now, in his last fight against Reyes, that was his first fight with Robert Garcia, who he moved to after he had been with trainer Joe Goossen for the Fonfara fight. One of the maddening things about the lead up to that fight for me personally was that Chavez Jr. and his camp tried to spin it as if the reason he performed poorly in the Fonfara fight and the reason he wasn't in shape is somehow because he didn't make a connection with Joe Goossen, and Goossen didn't demand enough of him, and Goossen didn't speak Spanish, and so that was an issue. And I'm going to tell you something. I was offended at the idea that they tried to throw Joe Goossen under the bus. I'm still offended at that idea. Joe Goossen is an excellent trainer. He has trained many other fighters who spoke Spanish, and that wasn't a problem. And when you're a fighter who has a reputation for not training, and had, among others, a Hall of Fame trainer previously that you couldn't figure out a way to train with, even though he's willing to come to your house, I think that the idea of throwing a trainer under the bus is not a very good idea. Now, there was no difference in the way he fought against Reyes and the way he fought against Fonfara. That's the other point. For all they made out of the new camp and how much better he did, the only difference was Reyes was a different opponent. He's smaller. He's really a 160-pounder. When he faced Fonfara, Chavez Jr. did, he was facing a true 175-pounder. And Fonfara is a better fighter and a more powerful fighter than Reyes. But Reyes in that fight, and it went to decision, was able to get a lot done against Chavez Jr. And in fact, the technique And the way Chavez Jr. fought was no different than the way he fought against Fonfara. It still was an unfocused effort where his defensive liabilities came to the forefront, and he was just able to win because he was more powerful than Reyes. And so he won that fight. Now he has to make his entrance back into boxing in some way. Can't do it at 175. It's quite apparent. Has to try and do it at 168. This is his final effort, in my opinion, at trying to gain respect from the boxing community and make himself a relevant fighter. In the last several years, his career has steadily gone downhill. And the first thing is it's going to be incumbent upon him to make 168 pounds, because in these other fights where they're willing to accept that, he was the A side of the equation. In this case, Badou Jack is the A side of the equation. Let's talk about Jack for a moment. This 32-year-old who suffered a knockout loss in 2014, but came back from that to win a title by beating Andre Durrell and then defending the crown against George Groves. Now, his fight with George Groves was an intriguing one, because here was Badou Jack in his very first title defense. After beating Andre Durrell, a very good fighter, to win the title, he took on essentially what might have been one of the tougher 168-pounders he could have faced other than unifying the championship. We'll talk about that in a moment. So the fact that he was able to he took on George Groves, and I thought performed very well in that fight. It was a split decision, but I thought it should have been unanimous. Though George Groves fought very well, and that only enhanced Badou Jack's win, because it wasn't as if he fought a fighter that didn't fight well that night. George Groves did fight well. He just couldn't deal with Badou Jack. And let me tell you something else about Badou Jack. He has now become, I think, if not the best, one of the top 2 or 3 best body punchers in the sport of boxing. He is a fantastic body puncher. And he has maintained discipline and a focus to the sport since that upset loss. And that's what's gotten him back into the picture, something that clearly Cesar Chavez Jr. Could learn from. So for Jack, this becomes a well-known opponent that he can put a notch in his belt. We'll see how that goes, and we'll see if the fight is made. I believe it will be, and the next step will be whether, in fact, Chavez Jr. can make the weight and they can make it a championship fight. Waiting in the wings is another one of the 168-pound champions, James DeGale from England, who just had a spirited and exciting fight with Boutte in Canada, and it was a thrilling fight in which he won, and won convincingly, but Boutte was able to fight a terrific fight and still get some things done. And James DeGale, who is a boxer, very much a boxer-puncher, was willing to mix it up with Boutte to make it exciting. The fight that we all want to see is Boutte against Badou Jack. And I do believe DeGale has a mandatory defense that he's going to be doing in the next couple of months, possibly in April. And if he should win that, and if Jack should beat Chavez Jr. or whomever he'll fight, we all want to see Badou Jack and James DeGale. And that fight should be held this year, because both men are slightly to the north side of 30, and the days of waiting for those kind of matches in boxing should be over, and we'd like to think they're over. And both DeGale and Jack are under the Premier Boxing banner, so it should be easy for them to make that fight. And it's one that I very much hope will be happening toward the end of this year. And 168-pound division resonating as it did during the days when the Carl Froches and Andre Wards and Abrahams and Durrell and the like, Boutte were big names in that division. So we'll see what happens, whether the Jack Chavez Jr. fight gets made, and it will tell us a lot about whether Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. will remain a fighter of relevance in the sport of boxing.